Or have you changed your mind?
Yes, Your Honor, I'll testify.
Okay. And you don't need any more time to think about that?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, Deputy.
Excuse me, for the record, we have talked at length about that.
Okay.
He wants to testify.
All right. Okay.
Can I get my witness too?
Yes, yes, please. Okay, please be seated. Members of the jury, I apologize for the delay in getting started this morning. I had to deal with some legal issues. And I want to also explain to you that yesterday there were some times that we had headsets on. We were discussing legal matters. We're not trying to hide anything from you, so I hope you understand that. But it's very important that you only consider evidence that is properly before you in rendering your verdict. So I know it can be frustrating, but I want to be careful, and I want you to consider the right evidence. Okay? The state may, or the defense may call its first witness.
Steve Hines.
Yes. Come forward, please. And would you stand behind the witness chair? And raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify against your witnesses?
Yes, ma'am.
Please take the witness chair and please remove your mask. State your full name and spell it.
Stephen Bradford Imes, S-T-E-P-H-E-N. Bradford is B-R-A-D-F-O-R-D. And the last name is I-James, I-J-A-M-E-S.
All right. There's a court reporter taking down everything that's being said, so you have to follow certain rules. You have to answer yes or no instead of shaking your head. No, uh-huh, or uh-uh. If you don't understand a question, let the lawyer know. Only one person can speak at a time. So wait until the question's finished before you answer. And most importantly, if an objection is made, stop talking immediately. Do not answer the question unless I tell you to.
Yes, ma'am.
Counsel?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Imes, how old a man are you?
I'm 64, sir.
Where are you from?
Springfield, Missouri.
Did you drive up here yesterday?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about your education, your undergraduate degree and a master's degree.
I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a master's degree in public administration.
And do you remember when you got those?
80s and 90s.
Okay. You've had a career in law enforcement, have you not?
I continue to be commissioned as a Class A peace officer in Missouri today, yes, sir.
How many years have you been a police officer?
I'm in my 44th right now.
Okay. Have you attended, in the course of your career, certain law enforcement academies?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell us what those are?
Initially, the Missouri State Highway Patrol Academy, and then the Springfield, Missouri Police Academy, which is an internal 1,000-hour academy. As for basic police training, that's the two initial academies I went to.
Did you attend the FBI Academy?
I'm a graduate of the 186th FBI National Academy, yes, sir.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Where did that take place?
It's in Quantico, Virginia, and it's considered the premier training for law enforcement managers and commanders in American policing. We also do foreign countries. I think there's been 117 countries that have sent senior police commanders, but it's primarily an American police finishing school for commanders.
Have you been to the DEA Academy as well?
Yes, sir. Graduate of the DEA Academy also.
And what was involved in that?
That was a 2-week commander's academy simply for running drug schools, drug programs, basically a focused command effort to teach you to do a better job of doing safe and effective policing in a pretty complicated area of the drug world. And that's what
I suppose we ought to say what the DEA means in terms of those initials. What,
sure,
what
Drug
is
Enforcement
DEA?
Administration.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you what your specific experience is in law enforcement and a number of your other qualifications before we get to this case. Tell us about your law enforcement career. How did it start and what did you initially do?
As with almost every police officer, I started as a basic patrolman, driving a patrol car, answering calls, just your general call for service. Promoted from there to a narcotics drug investigator, and then from there to just a general crimes investigator, your basic TV detective. I left a smaller department after 3.5 years, primarily to get my 4-year degree. I moved to Springfield, Missouri from Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and went back through the academy. Policing is unique, in some ways good, some ways bad, but it's not a profession by many standards. For example, when I moved from one department to another, I went right back to school. It wasn't like since I had been a police officer, I just come to work. So in Springfield, regardless of my detective experience, I went right back to the academy for 1,000 hours, and then 13 weeks of riding with a training officer.
So let me back up. Did you start out with the Poplar Bluff Police Department?
Yes, sir.
And then after that certain amount of time, you went to Springfield, the Springfield Police Department. Is that correct?
I was in Poplar Bluff for about 3.5 years, and then to Springfield, was there for 25. I retired there as the assistant chief. But the beginning is right back to the street. So I did several years as a patrol officer after the academy. I rotated in to work the jail for 9 months. We had a 14,000 prisoner a year jail booking process that if we were short on civilians, they would grab the low senior people. So I did 9 months in the jail. I dispatched for a while, worked the front desk. You just do whatever they tell you to do in the early days especially.
And did you advance through the department?
Yes, sir.
Tell us what your advancements were.
After several years in those assignments I just mentioned, I was transferred to an undercover narcotics role, where I basically bought hand-to-hand drug buys off about 300 suspects. Ultimately promoted to a detective corporal, which is a plainclothes investigator, kind of what you see on TV, doing every type of post-event investigation, robbery, homicide, theft, that sort of thing. Ultimately promoted to sergeant in the detective division. And then in 1989, a catalyst event, a pretty catastrophic hostage-taking scenario, resulted in us creating a full-time SWAT team versus a part-time team that would not be as practiced and experienced.
What's a SWAT team for our own?
Special Weapons and Tactics is what the terminology references, but it's basically a group of officers. It varies by department, but for most it's an elevated skill proficiency group that focuses on really critical incidents, day in, day out, your drug search warrants, barricaded suspects, hostage takings. And we had an event that finished well, but it wasn't because we did well. We had a hostage taking that finished successfully, but because the suspect allowed the victim to be released. And the chief recognized after that that we simply didn't have the capability as a part-time team to solve it. And so he created a full-time team. I was asked to lead that team. And when I say full-time, just to be clear, most SWAT teams in America, about 98%, have collateral duties. They work in patrol, they work as a detective. In our environment, it was the only job we had, 10-hour training day a week, and nothing but search warrants, barricades, and the rare hostage taking. So I had that team for many years.
About how many, remember?
As the direct supervisor, first-line person, 89 to about 94. I kept it in my division as command almost to the last day I was there, but functionally, once you make captain, you're not an operator anymore. You need to allow line people to work. So once you're at that level, I stopped doing the day-to-day work with them.
And what other responsibilities did you have after that with the department?
When I promoted to lieutenant from that division, I kept supervision of SWAT, but I also had narcotics. So you had all drug investigations, all special operations, K-9, bicycle unit, just odd things that police departments lumped together. Ultimately promoting to a captain and took over the Uniform Patrol Division, which would be everything you see in a uniform, from a DARE program, drug abuse resistance education, to uniform patrol, to a school crossing guards, just everything you think uniform policing. About 3 years later, I think I was promoted to major and took over all investigations, which would take you out of uniform, but then anything, plainclothes, narcotics, robbery, homicide, anything that would be your perspective of a plainclothes detective, and I had that role until I retired as the assistant chief.
Along the way, while you were at the Springfield Police Department, did you work with the United States Marshal's Office?
I was a commissioned marshal on a number of task forces at various times in my career. There's reasons why agencies do that, to give you a different level of authority. And there's also some funding reasons why you do that. You can get money funneled to a department to help with overtime and things like that. But on a number of occasions, yes, sir.
Did you also work on a DEA task force while you were at Springfield?
On a number of them, yes, sir.
You indicated that you were a licensed police officer for 43 years. Have you considered now retiring from active duty, so to speak?
As recent as 2 months ago, I was driving a marked patrol car for the State Park Police, the park rangers. I'd done that for the last 3 years. Had some medical hiccups that have caused me to resign that commission, but I'm not sure what will happen after the first of the year, but I'm leaning more towards family stuff. But
well,
we'll see.
You've come up here in a car. Did you recently have heart surgery in Chicago?
Open heart surgery last week.
Okay. All right. Which is one of the factors you're considering in retiring.
My wife's certainly considering that, yes, sir.
Okay. Do you know what a critical incident is?
Definition varies from agencies. There's no national standard definition, but for most agencies, it's an incident that involves an enhanced potential for death or serious physical injury over your ordinary day-to-day call.
In your 43-year career, how many critical incidences have you been involved with?
I couldn't begin to answer that. I mean, it'd be many, many, many.
Can you give us an estimate?
Hundreds.
And were some of those critical incidents involving guns and shots fired?
I would say the vast majority, not that you can't be in immediate deadly jeopardy with something besides a gun, but normally, because the gun issue involves distance and capability, you can usually stay away from a knife person to some degree, but most of them involve guns because they're harder to control.
Do you have any teaching experience?
Beginning in the late 80s, I became a generalist and specialist instructor for the Missouri Department of Public Safety and began just teaching in Missouri, primarily drug-related investigations, and then as our SWAT team evolved, began doing SWAT training. Not because, we were the best, but we were busy and we had good outcomes. We were able to get the job done without anyone getting hurt. And in policing, you quite often look to others who are doing something that seems to be where you want to be, and you learn from that. So we began doing a lot. I began doing a lot of tactical training. There's an international organization called the NTOA. It's the National Tactical Officers Association, but it has 40 countries represented. Began teaching for them. In the late 80s, early 90s, we began videotaping virtually everything we did, which in American policing, that was just stunning, that you would videotape what you were doing, and many, many people question the logic in that. For us, it was primarily a critiquing, learn from training perspective, but because we had video, of operations, of things going well, things going bad, it greatly enhanced the teaching capability. So I could show videos of actual operations. One thing led to another, and I was asked by the director of the NTOA to be one of their 4 national board members. So once I became on the board, a key part of that was teaching for the National SWAT Association.
Well, let me interrupt you then. Let me list a couple organizations you've taught for, if I may. Have you
Yes, sir.
Presented for the United States Department of State?
In 33 countries, yes, sir.
Have you presented for the International Association of Chiefs of Police?
Many, many times.
You've made presentations in many states in the United States, have you not?
Yes, sir. I think pretty much everywhere.
Okay. You have made presentations on the international arena in Somalia,
Yes, sir.
Haiti.
Many, many times in Haiti.
You've made presentations to SWAT officers in London, Amsterdam, Brussels, Dusseldorf, Nuremberg, Belfast, among other places.
33 countries, yes, sir.
You've made presentations for the United States Department of Justice in Bosnia.
Yes, sir.
You've also worked as an evaluator for various countries and how they operate their police forces and their SWAT teams. Have you not?
Not unique to foreign countries. I've actually done more evaluations here in the United States. That's actually a key part of what I've done, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, is do evaluations for agencies that would just like an outside external perspective. In some cases after a tragedy, a critical incident, but in some they'll invite you in and say, hey, I've just taken over this department and it looks good to me, but I would just like an outside look, someone who doesn't have a dog in the fight. So I do a lot of that, more in the United States, but I have done a lot overseas, but more here.
Well, let me ask you whether overseas you've worked with various countries, including Jamaica,
Yes, sir.
Canada,
Yes, sir.
countries in Southeast Asia,
Yes, sir.
Tanzania,
Yes, sir.
Greece,
Yes, sir.
Yemen,
Yes, sir.
Kenya,
Yes, sir.
Indonesia,
Yes, sir.
and that's just a start.
Been to a lot of them, yes, sir.
Okay. And you've also trained officers in terrorism and counterterrorism, have you not?
A key focus of the international training, not surprising when you consider the last 20 years or so, post 9/11 for sure, a critical focus of our U.S. government effort overseas that involves local police. A lot of individuals don't understand that much of the American policing effort overseas that the U.S. government funds is done by police officers, not the military. Nothing wrong with the military, simply that our government, I believe, thinks that it's best for police to train the police. And so post 9/11 especially, a key focus of what I've done is under what's called a anti-terror assistance training program, which is through Department of Justice or state, geared towards teaching concepts that just make our embassies safer and make our citizens safer in countries that might have a potential for enhanced risk for terrorism. Yes, sir.
Okay. Have you made presentations and worked with the United States Army, the United States Air Force, the New York City Police Department, and police departments in California, Wisconsin, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Illinois, among other places?
Been here a lot of times.
You are an instructor for tasers, are you not?
Not for Taser. I've never worked for the company.
How does that work when you say you didn't ever work for the company? Tell us how one becomes an instructor on tasers.
So Taser was invented in 1965. A man named Jack Cover, and it went through a number of different patents and owners, but ultimately the Smith brothers, Rick and Tom Smith, took over the Taser patents in the mid-90s, slightly varied to get around some technical issues, but in the mid-90s, the Smith brothers created the current process that became the Taser today. And in 1999, they did their first instructor-trainer program where they would create training to teach teachers. And that first program was done in my police department by Rick Smith, the owner of the company. And I was in that class. And I always felt like that I had been training for a number of years up to that point, that if you ended up appearing to be in bed with a company, if you worked for a company, that your ability to speak truthfully without people wondering what your motivation was would be an issue. So I just made a decision in the mid-90s to, though I was very involved in technical training, whether it was pepper spray, whether it was a plastic bullet, tear gas, I would never work for a company because I just felt like you kind of have to carry the party line. And so Mr. Smith allowed me to go through that class with the understanding that I would not be a Taser instructor. In the early 2000s, there was a lot of controversy with police departments being accused of being too tightly aligned with manufacturers, getting free things, basically using tools on citizens in scenarios that might be questionable. And so you began to have training crop up where individual agencies wanted teaching from outside of a company. They basically didn't want the party line. And so the International Association of Chiefs of Police, who I've been involved with for years, largest and oldest police organization in the world since 1897, had me develop a TASER program. We actually couldn't use the term. It was Conducted Energy Weapon, CEW training program, to where we could teach agencies TASER process, but not be under the TASER banner.
And you have taught TASER courses?
Many.
Okay, you're familiar with the protocols for the current TASER, TASER 7?
Both the teaching and then what we would call your best practices policies that are out there. There's different groups that give models, examples of how they think the device should be used. Not all in lockstep, but I'm very familiar with those as well.
Well, we're almost done with your qualifications, but I want to ask you just a couple more questions. Have you had any academic affiliations where you're taught policing and criminal justice matters at a college level?
Yes, sir. I've taught seated classes at different universities. I mean, 3-day-a-week classes, and then I've done just adjunct faculty, things like that. I don't do anything like that now, and I don't anticipate it again.
How many officers over the course of your 43 years do you estimate that you've trained in the reasonable use of force, including tasers and guns? Give a sense of how many people you've trained.
It'd be thousands. I don't want to just guess. It would be thousands.
Have you received any awards during the course of your career?
Some, yes, sir.
Well, are you a member of the American Police Hall of Fame, for example?
Yes, sir.
And what is that?
It's just a national police organization that recognizes certain acts in police service.
Are you the recipient of the Silver Star for Bravery?
Yes, sir.
What is that?
It's an award given for actions that meet their standards to acknowledge, I guess, above and beyond the normal duty.
And what did you get the award for?
Rescuing a hostage in a liquor store holdup that had been shot, and engaging the suspect in that case and shooting and killing him.
Have you had any publications during the course of your career?
Around 100 articles, chapters for books, peer-reviewed articles, some not, but I would estimate around 100.
Mr. Rimes, I could spend quite a bit more time with your qualifications, but is the history of your career set forth in your CV, which is Exhibit 1001?
Yes, sir.
We offer 1001 for the defense.
Is there any objection?
We do, Your Honor. It's hearsay.
It's his resume, correct? The objection is overruled and the exhibit will be admitted.
Did I contact you or the defense contact you for the purposes of your initial review of this case?
I don't remember.
Well, you were contacted. It doesn't matter who, but
Yes,
you were
sir.
contacted
I don't
to see if
recall.
you would review this case, were you not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. How many cases have you reviewed for reasonable use of force, excessive force, that sort of thing in the course of your career?
A fair number would be between 2,000 and 3,000.
How many criminal cases do you have right now under your review?
4.
Of the 4 cases that you have, how many of those are you testifying for or on behalf of the police officer or against the police officer?
This is the only one that would be considered, if that's the perspective, for an officer. The other 3, my opinions, would be against the officer.
Are we paying you to be here?
No, sir.
And why is that?
I decided in the mid-90s when this process began, I began asked to review cases that I would never take a fee in a criminal case regardless of the side that was calling me. I'm not Mr. Benevolent. I like to get paid like anyone else. But I just felt that something as significant as someone's freedom suggested I should give an opinion without any question about motivation. I may say things you don't agree with, but I don't think the issue of money coming into it should be a consideration. So I just decided in the 90s I would never take a fee for a criminal review of any kind, regardless of the initiation, but I've stood by that, and if I continue to do this, I'll continue to take that perspective.
Well, we asked you to review this case. Do you remember initially what you did review?
Yes, sir. It was a voluminous file. As I recall, our initial discussion focused around the deployment of a taser. That was the primary focus. This case, and in no way am I diminishing, it's not a complicated case, the facts itself. But the focus initially was the issue of a decision to deploy and manner of deployment of the taser.
Okay. So you looked at the videos?
Videos,
statements,
various reports. I didn't review everything in it. I reviewed those things I felt were necessary to give me the information to render reasonable opinions concerning the decision to deploy and the manner of deployment of the taser. Yes, sir.
Which really centered on the officers on the scene, Mr. Wright's conduct, and the training.
And some foundational stuff, issues concerning what an officer would have been taught, what would have caused them to think certain things, but almost exclusively it's the officers on the scene. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, since the trial began, have you reviewed actual testimony that the jury has heard?
In the last week, within some limits of my ability in the last week, I was able to follow some things that were online that involved testimony. Yes, sir.
Did you, for example, follow the testimony of Officer Lucky?
Yes, sir.
Sergeant Johnson?
Yes, sir.
Sergeant Peterson in training?
The training sergeant, yes, sir.
And also Mr. Stoughton yesterday?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, let's start your review by your understanding of what happened here. Would you discuss the nature of the stop and what you saw, and then I'll get you some more specific questions on the use of the taser. What did you initially see in your review?
Yes, sir. You've got an officer in field training and a recruit, for lack of a better term, and there's an initial assessment of the vehicle in front that has something hanging from the mirror. Your state, as with other states, has a statute that says you can't have anything between the driver and the windshield. And so I think that was the initial reference. Field training is a process of work. You want recruits to do things and test them and figure out that they understand the basic practices and protocols. So the license was checked. There determined to be some difficulty with, I believe, the registration tabs. So you had basically your statutory issue about something hanging between your eyes and the windshield, and then a license violation, and the stop was initiated from there.
Okay. Was the matter of a warrant for a gun of significance to you in any way? The fact that the officer on the scene found out that there was a warrant outstanding for the driver of the car.
Oh, yes, sir.
Well, was that significant for you in any way?
Yes, sir.
And how so?
Police officers aren't clairvoyant. The best way to indicate what might happen tomorrow is what happened yesterday. So we teach officers to act on reasonable appearance. And so if I find a person on a stop that has a weapons charge or a gun warrant, it doesn't mean they have a gun. It means they very likely could have a gun because they've had one in the past. So an officer would immediately take a different perspective, not that they would act necessarily differently, but they would begin to address this call for service differently because we have reasonable, objective information that a gun could be in play.
How about the existence of a harassment order? Did that have any import in your evaluation of the case?
Same basic thought process. We teach officers to look at the totality of circumstance, everything involved in this case. So if we have, in this case, a female in the car, and we have a harassment reference as well, is that the person? What's the nature of the harassment? It just continues to elevate an officer's vigilance. And I want to be clear, it's not that we then use weapons or use force, but we absolutely look reasonably on appearance of the facts we learn as we move forward about potential danger, potential resistance, and then act accordingly.
Well, does the harassment order increase or decrease an officer's possible perception of dangerousness?
It would increase. I mean, it's certainly different than a felony assault, but it's also different than a shoplifting charge. So harassment would indicate a personal interaction in a negative way, and it would just cause an officer to be more vigilant concerning that type of interaction.
How about the existence of the female passenger in the car? What significance was that to you?
The third party present, officers basically look at calls for service from a safety priority perspective, so that third citizen in there, not the focus of the event, increases your concern for her safety, but also what role, if any, she plays in that harassment charge. Is that the person named in that particular event? Have they made up? People do. It would be very relevant to continuing that investigation.
With a bench warrant outstanding for the driver, was there, in your view, an obligation to arrest him, meaning Mr. Wright?
Absolutely a mandate.
We have an opinion yesterday that the officers could have let him go because he could have been arrested later. And your response to that?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, to a statement of the evidence.
The objection is overruled.
Police officers enforce the law. The order from a judge, in my experience, is literally the highest order we operate under. And if a court order, a warrant from a judge says that person is subject to arrest, they will be arrested, and there's consequences if you don't. Some states, including mine, criminalize it. If you don't serve an arrest warrant, it's a crime. Not every state, but that emphasizes the seriousness of it. It's not a request. It's not a suggestion. An arrest warrant is an order to arrest, and that's what police officers do.
So in your view, Lucky, former Officer Potter, and Johnson had to arrest him?
Dereliction of duty not to.
You know, as a supervisor, in Missouri, one of the leaders of the department, would you have disciplined an officer for not executing or not arresting on a warrant from the court?
Beyond question.
Now, turning to the Lucky's behavior and his actions, you remember that he goes up to the car and asks Mr. Wright to step out. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Was that correct police procedure in your view?
Yes, sir, it is.
Was it correct police procedure in your view to tell him that he was, once out of the car, under arrest?
Beyond question.
And why is that important to tell someone like Mr. Wright that he's under arrest?
It may seem obvious that we would tell people they're under arrest, but in my experience, it quite often doesn't happen. An officer knows there's a warrant for you, and they stand the person up and say, turn around and put your hands behind your back. But it is a critical aspect of that officer-citizen encounter at the time of the arrest to look right at them and say, you are under arrest. And so in this case, we had two officers that actually said it. I just want to make it clear that the assumption that that always happens, it really doesn't. And so it's critical because it basically removes all confusion. When we say you're under arrest, that's exactly what